Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. I'm going to give you a brief overview of a few things that are going on. Later on the podcast, you will hear from Carol Davis with the Illinois Conservative Union. She'll discuss election integrity, including that new movie out called 2,000 Mules. Also on with me is Kelly Laschinski. She is a mother and a teacher who will be here talking about social emotional learning. What does that mean, and why is it happening in our schools? So first of all, starting out though, I want to thank again our sponsors for our May 13th event with John Cass and Dan Proft. Unfortunately, by the time you hear this podcast, all the tickets will be taken up. So no hope coming to this event, but hopefully in the future you'll get to one of our events. We want to thank netmotorcars.com and especially Michael Colby for signing on as a sponsor to our event. You can go to netmotorcars.com, go visit their huge showroom, and they have excellent financing there to get you the car that you like. And also thank you to our sponsors, Kai's Restaurant in Glendale Heights. They, of course, are where you can find great seafood and a wonderful steak. My favorite is the French onion soup and the steak sliders. Love those two combos together. So, again, Kai's, thank you again for being a sponsor to our program on May 13th. Looking at a few headlines, though, one thing I want to touch on, and we don't talk about it anymore, right? COVID's kind of over. Well, I don't know. They kind of want to bring it back. They're really working hard to bring it back. But I think people are over it. We're just over it. Well, maybe we should actually have some conversations about it, because last week in Illinois, 78.4% of the people who died, and unfortunately people are dying of COVID. I recognize that. I recognize it's still a serious disease for many people, but we need honest assessment of what's going on with COVID. 78.4% of the folks who died with COVID in the state of Illinois last week, and there were 51 deaths, by the way, 78% of them were breakthrough deaths. That means that 78% of those folks were fully vaccinated. Not just, one shot, but had the whole regimen of shots recommended by the government. And 78% of them were breakthrough deaths. Now, when you look back really 10 weeks, 7 of the last 10 weeks, the majority of deaths were breakthrough deaths. So something's going on here, and we're not getting enough information about it. I think we need to talk about this more. Hopefully, with one of my future podcasts, I will get an expert in to talk about that. A couple other things that I think are important to just highlight here is one, that Kim Foxx has been named one of the 5 worst prosecutors in America. Is anybody surprised by this? Obviously, this is somebody who refuses to prosecute an entire array of offenses. She seeks to decriminalize drugs. She has stopped using cash bail, and she has decarcerated even cases of serious offenders. And she's claimed that the criminal justice system is racist, but she ignores the fact that the majority of murder victims in her city are minorities. Well, what's racist about that? Kim Foxx, what is happening? And then another thing that's going on in the crime area, there is a co-responders pilot program that has been started up. This was put into action by Springfield, and the police departments actually of Springfield, of East St. Louis, Peoria, and Waukegan are establishing co-responder units that will work with social workers and mental health professionals on calls involving those who may need mental or behavioral health services. So it's a pilot program. We'll see how this works out. Maybe it'll be a success. Don't know, but they're going to try it. All right, so basically want to highlight that. Also, John Cass, I want you to read his article. He's out there doing a mea culpa, admitting that he was wrong to have supported Lori Lightfoot, because there's nothing safe in this city with Lori Lightfoot in charge. Nothing. Between her, Kim Foxx, and Tony Preckwinkle, who really, honestly, gets a pass. You know what? These people are the ones who are responsible for much of the crime and destruction that you have seen in Chicago, not to mention the financial destruction as well. So, again, I was reading a few of those headlines from my favorite organization, wirepoints.org. wirepoints.org. I highly encourage you to go to Wirepoints, sign up for their daily emails. They give you, quite a few articles that center around things that are happening in Illinois or related to Illinois. And then the other area, the other set of people you should sign up for is the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. That's Stephen Moore's group. And I highly suggest you sign up for their daily emails as well. So that's all I have for this segment, but you will be hearing shortly here in the next segment from Carol Davis with Illinois Conservative Union. Thank you for joining me on my podcast. Stay tuned. Okay, this is The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. And as I told you before, we like to put real people who do real things and have been in real situations on the podcast with me. So we're doing this one remote because Carol Davis just finished up about 2 hours of election judge training right here in Glen Ellyn. We're outside the Glen Ellyn Park District. They were kind enough to let us use their facility. And we had quite a few people at our election judge training tonight. And Carol is a longtime election judge herself. She's been doing this for 18 years. She's also the head of Illinois Conservative Union, and their big mission right now is election integrity. Carol also sits on FreedomWorks election integrity team, and she goes around the nation, not just around the state of Illinois, presenting her training called Guardians of the Vote. So Carol, welcome to my podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you so much, Jeannie, and what a great training it was tonight. What a great group of people. I'm so thankful when people step up to be a part of the process. That is what we need. So it was very encouraging.
Well, so you and I have known each other for a while, and we went through the whole 2020 election cycle. And then just this last week, Dinesh D'Souza came out with his 2,000 Mules, which I did watch. I watched it twice, as a matter of fact, because my son was enthralled by it. So we look at all that information, and what do you say about Dinesh's movie? Have you seen it yet first?
Yes, I did see it, and I actually, Catherine Engelbrecht was the person behind that, and her organization, True the Vote. And I have known Catherine since 2012, when she and I both had Tea Party groups, and she had King Street Patriots in Harris County in Texas, and of course we had West Suburban Patriots here in the Chicago area. And her Tea Party decided to become poll watchers. And so they showed up at the polls and they saw things that really set them back. And that's what started her on her path with True the Vote. And so I'm just so thrilled to see her work coming to fruition, because the basis of Dinesh's movie is all the work that she has done. And it should be very eye-opening for a lot of people.
Well, and I know one thing that your organization, Illinois Conservative Union, has been concerned about more than anything is cleaning up the voter rolls, because when the voter rolls are dirty, that's when you get the ability to actually maliciously steal somebody else's vote, because that person moved, that person's dead. We're going to have some problems here in the state of Illinois. They just instituted permanent vote by mail. Now, tell me, I do think that cleaning up the voter rolls is probably the most important thing that we can do that is non-mechanical, non-computerized. It's simply precinct committeemen and neighbors knowing who's in their neighborhood.
Absolutely. And, it can be that simple. It's just the frontline person in their local area. And you have to have a seat at the table. In Illinois, you have to be a part of a party to get a legal list or a candidate. And the ideal person to help clean the rolls is that frontline precinct committeeman, because he knows his neighbors, he knows the area, he knows when someone passes away, he knows when someone moves, and they need to step up and take a more active role in that. Now, of course, several years ago, we partnered with Judicial Watch and sued the Illinois State Board of Elections to basically open up the voter rolls so that the citizens could make sure they were being maintained. And that has its root in a federal law. It's the National Voter Registration Act, passed in 1993, and it has a Section 8 provision that mandates that the local authorities keep the rolls clean. They have not been doing that as well as they should. So top down, bottom up, process.
Right. So here's the deal. So pre-election, you need to know whether or not that voter roll is clean and true. Post-election, you need to check that the voter roll is clean and true. And that's where you have problems because at least in DuPage County, based off the everything we found out in 2020, they had more ballots cast than they had voters who voted. And their explanation that they actually put forward in a court document concerning the Bob Grogan recount challenge for his race, they actually said, well, the voter rolls are always changing. We don't have the actual list from the 2020 election. I mean, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. You should have a pure and clean list of who voted so you can go back and check that no additional names were added and then deleted, because I will tell you this, the elections integrity stuff that we have already started at Breakthrough, and we're not finished, by the way. I mean, a lot of these people think that we're just done. No, the guy who was in charge of it kind of went to Florida for a few months. So we're back at it. We're going to look at this further. But the truth is that literally thousands of people who voted in 2020, and then we have that list that they say was the list from 2020, even though it's short 1,600 votes. But that list, you can go forward to just a few months later, and thousands of people who voted in 2020 are off that list. Now, they just voted. Why are they off the list?
Exactly. The numbers just don't add up. And no matter how you look at the data, who looks at the data, it's been verified over and over again. And Jeannie, it's happened all over the country. More ballots counted than voters who voted. And it just is, one person checking in to vote, no matter if it's vote by mail, early voting, election day voting, casts one ballot. Why shouldn't that reconcile? No excuse.
So we're looking forward now. We've got early voting starting already on May 19th in DuPage County, and it starts on May 19th. All right. So, and it's May 10th right now as we're recording this. So that's 9 days away. You've got weeks upon weeks of early voting, and then you have election day voting. And on top of that, you have vote by mail voting. And on top of that, yes, and you've got 2 weeks to count it. I mean, what are we looking at the same sort of issues we had in 2020? Are we looking at drop-off boxes that are not supervised and not under camera surveillance 24/7? Are we looking at permanent vote by mail that doesn't make sense? Are we looking, what are we looking at?
Unfortunately, we are looking at a mess. And I believe a lot of it is intentional. I'm sorry, the people on the left are trying to detach individuals from their local polling places, any accountability. They want to create this mass chaos, mass confusion, so there's no accountability. I wouldn't have said that years ago, but I've seen it all over the country. I've heard the firsthand reports from very reputable people. It's intentional, and good people have to stand up and push back against it and not get tired. Push back, push back.
Right. I think there's a lot of investigation that needs to be done. I think if frontline workers are the key, I think if the committeeman knows their voter registration data 30 days prior to the election, because you have to have legal residency 30 days prior to before that, and then you check with everybody, are you going to Florida? Where are your kids? Did somebody sign up to go to the military? How come you have a P.O. box for your voter registration when you live this street? I mean, there's a lot of issues that the frontline neighbor committeemen can find out ahead of time, but they need to check that after the fact as well. We know already that over 30,000 people who never voted for the last 10 years ended up voting in 2020. Well over 30,000. I mean, does that make sense? I don't think it makes sense.
It doesn't make sense. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is, and I hate to go here, but we found this, the folks in Virginia saw the same thing. We suspect someone is building a bank of unlikely voters in the weeks leading up to the election. Bank of unlikely voters that they can just make withdrawals from when they need the votes. And, until our state's attorneys start taking election fraud seriously, that's one of the biggest problems. We have state's attorneys and attorney generals who are not treating this as a serious crime. I understand there's big crimes going on all the time. They may look at election fraud as a small thing that isn't worth their resources. But if it's going on this great a scale, it is a big crime and it needs to be treated seriously. So we as citizens need to pressure those officials to start investigating and prosecuting.
So people can get involved. They can become a poll watcher. They can become an election judge. They can be a committeeman. They can just be paying attention. Any final words? Thank you for this podcast, by the way.
Well, thank you. And just thank you for the opportunity to get the word out. We are encouraging local task forces of exactly those judges, poll watchers, data people, people who will go to the election board meetings and hold their election authorities accountable to following best practices.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining on my podcast, The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. With me today in the studio is Kelly Laschinski. But before we get to her and introduce what she's going to be talking about, I want to again give a shout out to our sponsors for our May 13th dinner and discussion with John Cass and Dan Proft. And that would be first netmotorcars.com. Of course, you are free to visit their 30,000 square foot showroom where they have luxury vehicles and luxury SUVs. And when you go there, ask for Michael Colby. Michael Colby will be the man who can take care of all of your needs, including financing. So again, we appreciate the support of netmotorcars.com as one of our chief sponsors for our event on Friday. Another good sponsor is Kai's Restaurant in Glendale Heights. That's where you want to go if you want really fresh seafood and a great steak. Visit Kai's Restaurant. Again, they're the ones who stood up to J.B. Pritzker and said, you know what, we're Americans and we're staying open. So they are a sponsor of our event on Friday, which at this point is sold out. But if you can still patronize our sponsors, we would appreciate it. So back to the program. So with me in studio is Kelly Laschinski. She's a suburban mom. And she's been paying attention to what's been going on in the school districts for quite a while now. Mm-hmm. And as all of us have kind of wondered what is happening. Right. And of course, a lot of this started when we had remote learning and many parents got sort of a window into what's going on in the classroom because it was right there on the screen. And so we've been developing lots of different stories from that. First of all, the lack of attention really on grades and actually academic learning, and instead all this other sort of soft stuff that's been going on. But actually it may sound soft, but it's really hard lessons for young kids that they don't deserve to learn. And so one of those is this idea of social emotional learning. It is the buzzword commonly referred to as just simply SEL. It's been around for a long time, actually, a lot longer than most parents believe. That some people think, well, this just popped up in the last 2 years. That is not true. This is something that legislatively we were dealing with even back when I first started as a state legislator in 2013, but it even goes back further than that. This is a long-term sort of academic program put together by academics to basically determine, basically help children develop better social skills, or so they speak. But I would say it's a little bit more nefarious than that. I was reading from an article that Jennifer McWilliams wrote. Jennifer McWilliams has become kind of an expert on this particular topic. She is a former school teacher from Indiana. She was working as a reading intervention instructor when she became very concerned about the education transformation unfolding at her school and across the nation. And as she began to research what was causing the shift in focus from academics to ideology, she learned about the driving force behind that change, and that was social emotional learning. I'm reading directly from her website, jennifermcwilliamsconsulting.com. And you were there, I were there, along with at least 100 other people recently in Elmhurst at a symposium, and she gave the speech on that. And she had a lot of great talking points, but she's now traveling across America, educating all sorts of people about social emotional learning. And she wrote an article for the Center for Renewing America, and she did talk specifically about SEL, and in that she says, well, look, it sounds like it might be good, but in reality it's a way to teach kids to be more ideological rather than it's really about changing their social behavior to just be a nice person or to behave well in class, which that's what it's supposed to sound like. Right. But it's really not. So the 5 sort of competencies of social emotional learning, just to set the stage here, are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And she writes in her article, at first glance, those skills seem harmless or even desirable, but they're not. There are many individual social emotional learning programs such as Leader in Me, Second Step, which follow sort of CASELs. CASEL was kind of the first people to put this together. Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. That's what they do. They make a lot of money selling their program to schools, by the way. But these SEL programs using CASEL's framework and guidances they're used in all 50 states. But they're actually a way to transform children's perception of identity into left-wing frameworks such as intersectionality, which focuses on discrimination and privilege. And it gets, some of these terms get a lot more difficult to understand. But in practicality, what comes out of sort of an SEL mind frame are things like this positive behavioral interventions that they've been doing on. And in many cases, that's actually not working in the classroom. So before we get into a little bit more, well, first of all, let's turn it over to you. Kelly, can you give us an idea a little bit more about what you've been reading and studying about SEL and where you think this is, why are the schools even using it in your mind? Why are they even picking up on SEL? Does it just sound really good?
But that's a loaded question. So let me go even backwards one more step
and
say that beside being a mom, I'm also a teacher.
Okay.
And I've taught in public school and private school. I taught at Addison Trail High School. I taught at York High School, but I've also taught in private schools at Trinity Lutheran in Roselle. So I've seen this sort of thing infiltrating in both public and private school. And the fact that they call it, like you said, SEL, social emotional learning, it sounds really nice. When you see a description of what social emotional learning is, you can't help but think, oh, that sounds wonderful. They have the best interest of my children at heart. And I feel like they do that on purpose. It's purposefully vague in the description that they put out there. And it sounds very much like, oh, we want to care for your whole child. And of course, parents think, well, that's a wonderful thing. But as a teacher, and anybody who has ever been trained as a teacher, teachers know that that is exactly what we do in the classroom and what we've done in the classroom since day one. That's how we've always been trained, to take care of every aspect of a kid. We don't need this special program, to teach us how to care for a child. It's just built into what we do. And so it's particularly, like you said, nefarious because they kind of play on a parent's heartstrings, making them think that this is a necessary aspect of their children's education, when really it's just a foot in the doorway to some very bad things. So yes, I've seen the SEL being introduced in some of the public schools, and it kind of got its foot in the door as being kind of student management kind of a program.
Yeah, so it was more about
behavioral management.
So as you've seen a rise in single parenthood, for example, as you've seen, which is very disruptive to a child.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think most people would argue that it's not. And certainly there are single parents who do a great job. We're not saying that.
Right.
But for the most part, there's issues there. As you've seen, just the culture becoming more coarse, rules become more lenient. You've had to have some sort of system that they used to call classroom management.
Right.
And now they're essentially saying, well, we need to focus on the child, and it's child management.
Right. And
so I think the bad thing for me with SEL is that it's not just there's always been I think we can remember back in our childhood there's always been like maybe one or two two kids a little bit more disruptive than the normal,
right?
But now with SEL, it's as if every single child is viewed as needing social emotional support from the system, right?
Right.
From the public system.
Right.
For which and then the whole idea that at least in our high school, we want every child to have a trusted adult in school.
Right.
Well, what does that
Counselor.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
May sound like it's fine, but what does that really mean? That
Right.
you can't trust the parents to be the trusted adult in that child's life, that they need something more than just the parent. I don't know. I don't get it.
Right. There's so many pieces of what you just said that are issues.
But that's essentially what they're doing. Every child
Definitely.
needs a support system now.
Right.
And there used to be sort of like, oh, hey, 10 things to make you successful. Let's just teach them a few of those skills.
Right.
But that's not
Right.
what this is, right?
No, and I think that symposium that you and I both saw, but by Jennifer McWilliams, she talked about how in the SEL program that every kid is treated as having issues. Every kid needs guidance from the counselor.
Right.
Everyone is a victim. I mean, we've seen enough things on the news lately in just the last couple years to know. If you go back to the rioting and things a couple summers ago, all of that, when the interviewers were on the street and asking these people that were looting and rioting, why are you doing this? It was about reparations. It was about we deserve this. It was about being victims, right? And
Right.
everything was totally legitimized because they were victims. And so who are we to say that they couldn't, grab things out of a store because we owed them? They are victims. And unfortunately, part of the SEL program is this victim type mentality. Whereas
That's right.
as we were kids, maybe there were a couple kids, like you said, who had some special issues. Maybe they needed some special attention. And maybe those were the ones that would, get cozy in the principal's office every once in a while. Now every single kid needs that attention. Every single kid needs counseling, and everybody has this victim status.
I would just, if I were a child today, having to put up with that sort of, I don't know, emphasis,
Right.
I would always feel eternally like I'm doing something wrong, or I need to look
Right.
behind my back, or what happened
Right.
here, or I can't be a kid. I mean,
Right. And
I
as a
don't-
teacher,
it's
how do
awful.
you deal with even having a kid or two in your class like that, let alone having a whole class of kids who are victims and need
Right.
help, and extra counseling or whatever it is that this program decides that these kids need? It's like, when does the teacher have any time to do anything academically?
I
Right?
don't know, but it used to be that the old time teachers would just be able to manage everything and put kids in line that need to be put in line. And if we went further. So where does this lead us? Well, one thing I want to talk about is this Western Springs attack that happened at Lyons Township High School. So there are charges now against a 16-year-old Heaven Washington, the Lyons Township sophomore who staged and had her friend film her while attacking and beating a freshman student last week. And this, of course, happened the last week of April. So Washington will be charged with battery, a Class A misdemeanor. The police chief Brian Budds wrote. I'm reading from a West Cook News article. The 16-year-old youth was arrested after an investigation stemming from her role in a physical altercation which resulted in an injury that occurred on 4/27/22. So this particular Heaven Washington, this girl, she told people that she was going to attack this freshman. She said it, and the freshman goes to the administration, and they didn't do anything about it.
Nothing.
They did nothing about it. But this is a problem, and it's not the first time that this girl has been a problem in the class, and yet they're not doing what they should, it doesn't seem, with problem children.
Right.
Are they sort of treating them as some social emotional victim, or are they seen as a victim? For the record, Heaven Washington is black, and we don't know.
Right.
I
mean, you don't want to go out on a limb and speculate, but then again, you seem to have some evidence towards that sort of a thought, because I know of a specific incident that happened at Lake Park recently. It was in April also.
Okay, what happened
here on
there?
this-
What happened at Lake Park?
Well, on this Facebook feed, it was posted by one of the parents that there was a student that was attacking other students, and it had happened repeatedly over the last 3 years. The student was being protected by the administration, and it's this weird it's like you're not protecting the victim.
So
we're
the student was
protecting
being
the
protected by the administration.
assaulter. Yes, the one who was doing the assaulting.
Okay.
And it's a situation like the one you just mentioned, because the victim is a student that's white, and the one who was doing the assaulting, unfortunately, was African American. So then you think to yourself, well, okay, we have this incident, we have what you just said, and we know that there's some other things like that going on, which makes you wonder, why is that they seem to be protected by the administration? Why can't they be expelled?
Again,
Why?
I think it is part of this SEL idea that the kids are treated as victims or victimer people who have privilege. As a follow-up to what happened at Lyons Township High School with Heaven Washington, LGIS News Service put out in their publication West Cook News. Again, they just put out this yesterday. By the way, we're doing this podcast on May 11th. On May 10th, LGIS reported that 10 days after student Heaven Washington's brutal, racially inspired in-school attack that led to battery charges, a Lyons Township High School administrator said the school plans to be more lenient in punishing non-white students for once major transgressions like fighting and drug use. So Lyons Township High School actually has a director of diversity and inclusion. She was hired last August to improve race relations at the school. This is what, and Jennifer Rowe is her name. And she told the Lyons Township District 204 School Board that she is replacing the school's existing code of conduct with a new one that would result in more oral warnings and fewer suspensions and expulsions, keeping even serious non-white student offenders like Washington on campus. The article goes on saying that Rowe and Lyons Township High School school principal Jennifer Tyrrell said that by June 1st, the school will adopt a new non-discriminatory code of conduct model that's being used currently to minimize non-white student punishments in Chicago public schools, as well as districts like Baltimore, Denver, Boston, and Buffalo. This approach will be greatly expanded moving forward in our work here, they said. And so Rowe read directly from the Framework for Revising School District Codes of Conduct published by the School Superintendents Association. So this is something that's being supported. This sort of more oral punishment stuff is being supported, even for serious offenses. It's being supported also by your school superintendent associations. Parents have no, look honest, unless you take over your school board and stop this,
Right.
you almost have no way to stop it because they're all in. They're all in for this.
Right. And
Yeah,
this,
they're
this
basically
family, filled out a police report on
And-
the Lake
and what
Park
happened?
student. I don't know that anything has happened yet.
Okay.
Nothing to my knowledge has happened to the perpetrator.
Well, the School Superintendents Association are promoting a theory of discipline called restorative justice, which argues that student punishment will only lead to further rebellion and it will teach the student nothing.
Yes, I guess he's a victim, right?
This is according to Daniel Buck, an English teacher and writer on education policy. Buck said a RAND study of the theory's implementation elsewhere is not encouraging, and that now millions of disadvantaged school children are consigned to academic mediocrity, emotional abuse, and physical threat in the name of restorative justice.
Wow.
So
It's like a little
it's-
microcosm of what's happening in New York City. All the criminals know they can get away with everything and then just get set free. Same thing in San Francisco, but now it's in the high schools.
Well, and then, 3 days after the Washington attack, the article goes on to say that their diversity and inclusion director, Rowe, hosted Lyon Township's Building Inclusive Community Conference for students. It included 17 workshops to choose from on topics such as homelessness, equal pay, colonialism, gender diversity, racial healing, invisible disabilities, expungement of criminal records, and the importance of voting.
Wow.
I mean, I knew nothing about these. I knew none of these terms practically. None of them were like in my, sure, we knew people who were about homeless, but we didn't. This was not topics in high school.
In high school,
even.
right.
When we were growing up. And now there's things to be taught and
That's the
informed
focus.
about in high school rather than the academics. And they also hosted a racial RX healing circle. Yes, I've heard about those too. They're kind of a bunch of garbage. So essentially, they're turning your kids into a psychological experiment in high school, in schools, by playing out there's the social emotional learning stuff that really has no place.
Well, it's a real emphasis on feelings. How do you feel about everything? Here, let's take a survey. And
okay, speaking of surveys, you say that there is a survey that you wanted to discuss.
Oh, the Panorama Survey.
Yes, the Panorama Survey. Tell us how that feeds into this, because it may be something that people hear about if you go to a school board meeting, which we entirely encourage people to do, attend your school board meetings. But Panorama is a program that has been adopted by a number of schools.
Right.
And what they do is they survey the students on all sorts of different metrics.
Right.
And that survey is shared throughout the district. And then they have programming behind that survey to help solve, quote unquote, problems that I think probably aren't even there.
Right.
But could you tell us a little bit more about the survey?
So, like you said, there's...
Or throw out some of the questions that you would find on the Panorama Survey.
Right.
Because I did discuss earlier the Illinois Youth Survey, and that stuff is pretty...
It's got the
pretty
SEL
invasive
language.
It's very invasive, actually.
Right.
You have to identify your gender, and,
Yes,
it talks about your race, and other things. It talks about any behaviors you have, maybe using illegal drugs or drinking. I mean, it's pretty invasive, and
exactly.
And actually, it was done. The survey that I showed people, and that I put up on our weekly newsletter. By the way, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Go to breakthrough-ideas.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter, and we give you a lot of information. Plus, you will be able to quickly hit a link to our podcast if you want to hear them that way. But so this was a middle school survey that I thought was pretty intrusive.
So this survey that I'm just looking at on the Panorama website, it's for ages 6 to 12.
6 to 12. Okay.
6 to 12.
And what do they ask?
So there's different sections of the survey. There's a section on diversity and inclusion. Those are the big,
because 6-year-olds know a lot about diversity and inclusion, don't they? 6-year-olds,
that's
yes,
first
of course.
grade. That's kindergarten,
know a
first
ton
grade.
about it.
There's a section about cultural awareness and action.
Oh, they know a lot about that too,
Yes.
don't they? Yes.
Sense
They
of
probably
belonging.
they can't spell the word, but they're going to know about it. They probably can't even read the survey.
Yeah, they might have to have somebody read it
A
for
6-year-old,
them.
seriously. A
I've heard
6-year-old
that
may
the
have to have it read to them.
And teachers might have to answer the questions for
You're
them.
kidding me.
I remember
I was
Jennifer
kind of joking,
McWilliams
but now that
saying
I think about it, how can these?
she said
you're going
that
to
in
give
her
a 6-year-old
SEL
a survey?
presentation. Yeah, because they're too little,
Of
and so
course
they
they
can't
are.
fill
Of
it
course they
out.
are. This is nonsense.
Right, and so sometimes either the teacher has to answer on their behalf.
Are you embarrassed for your profession?
It is embarrassing.
I mean, I hate to say that. There's a lot of great teachers. I'm the product of great teachers.
There are a lot of
people
great teachers.
And I feel bad for them. And I think if parents understood what good teachers have to go through, that they would stand up and speak out at their school boards. Because I don't imagine that a lot of teachers like any of this either.
Well, right, but a lot of this came in so sneakily. The frog in the boiling pot, right?
Yes.
It just kind of started off a little bit here, a little bit there, and pretty soon, all of a sudden, we're like, whoa, where did this come from? And then looking back, you think, okay, I kind of have seen this through the years building, but it's really been in our face this last year and a half for sure. So the survey topics, again, diversity and inclusion, cultural awareness and action, sense of belonging, background questions. Those are like different demographics, things that they would be asking you about your home situation.
Oh, great.
And then
does
free
your dad have
response.
guns in the house?
That could be one of them, right? Free response. I mean, that's kind of scary because they could ask you anything in free response, right? So let's see. Here's some diversity and inclusion questions. This is grades 6 through 12. How often do you spend time at school with students from different races, ethnicities, or cultures? Again,
What's an
how would
ethnicity?
a 6-year-old?
I'm
right.
6 years old. What's an ethnicity,
Right,
teacher?
right.
I can't even pronounce that word.
It's a big word for a little 6-year-old. How often do you have classes with students from different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds? At your school, how often do students from different races, ethnicities, or cultures hang out with each other?
Well, I'm in an all-black
that.
school, so I guess I don't have any racial diversity.
That's right. Everything's
And by the
fine.
way, there's plenty of all-black schools, public and private. I remember I went to go do a site visit at a Catholic school. 100% of the students were black.
One race, yeah.
100, so there's no diversity there either.
Right. And everything was just perfectly peaceful, right?
Well, actually, it was because it was a Catholic school. The
Oh,
kids were
okay.
well behaved. It was awesome.
There was some
Anyway,
good discipline. Nice. There's a question about how fairly do students at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures.
So now we're going to interpret every little thing that might have happened, a scuffle in the bathroom. It may have been a racial thing between 6-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
A fight for who gets to sit by the teacher during story time.
Right. And how about this one? How fairly do adults at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities?
Oh, so now the 6-year-old's judging the adults.
Gets to judge the adults, right. Right.
You can't make this. You cannot make this crap up.
No, and you think to yourself, okay, so they're doing this survey. First of all, does the kid know what they're saying? Do they really understand the question? Are they thinking, oh, do they want me to say this? You know, think about a kid who loves their teacher. Yeah. That teacher is their authority figure. They've been taught. Well, they love their teacher, right? So they want to give the right answer.
Right.
So why wouldn't they just give the answer that they think their teacher wants? Do you think this data is really correct? I mean, it may or may not be. Then you think to yourself, where's all this data going?
So, Kelly, if people want to look at this themselves, what website can they go to actually review the Panorama sort of information?
This is just right off the Panorama website. It was just panoramaed.com. And
panoramaed.com.
Yep.
Okay, you raised one more thing I want to do because this podcast is going long, but I do appreciate the conversation. One other thing that you do raise, they're asking these questions of 6-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12, whatever they do in high school.
All the way through, high school.
What you have said before, when we were just talking before we started this podcast, I think is absolutely true, in that they're essentially putting these thoughts and ideas into the kids' minds. It's not like kids have these ideas themselves.
Thoughts about gender, right.
It's not like they are looking at everything through a racial lens. But certainly by doing these surveys, you lead them to think about it in the future. It's similar to what the politicians do when they do what they call a push-pull, which is they ostensibly are asking questions about, if you knew this about so-and-so, how would you feel about them? If you knew this about so-and-so. So it's kind of a push-pull in that it gives you information about a candidate or a policy that leads you to answer a question in a particular way. In this case, you're giving kids a survey that leads them to then start thinking about things in a certain way. Or you're now having classroom discussions about social emotional issues, which they're not calling it social emotional issues. They're just infusing these types of CRT, social emotional issues, in the classroom, leading the kids down pathways where the kids would probably never even go or even think about.
Right. No, I found, again, as I was digging into more and more of what SEL is, why is it a problem? Why is it bad? You think about, what are they doing with all this data that they have taken from your kid? Data on every single thing about your child.
Well, that's the other thing McWilliams talked about, is that they are doing a huge data collection.
Exactly.
And building a profile on your child from the moment that they start with the first survey until they're done. That is information that's collected.
Right. Does it follow them? Where does it go? Does it hamper them if they're trying to get into college? Does something that somebody did in 4th grade, affect their life later in life? That'd be pretty scary if everything you and I did when we were kids, now affects our adulthood. Or what if you had an issue like with some trauma that happened as a child? Do you want that to follow you? No, you kind of get over it. It builds character or whatever, and then you get over it and you move on. But this sort of data might follow a kid for the rest of their life. What are they doing with this data? Who has access to the data?
That's a really good question, because I'm going to take you back a few years. When I was in Springfield, one of the first things that they did talk about is they wanted to have a social emotional screening for kindergartners. So it wasn't just on whether or not they could tie their shoe yet, if they knew any of their numbers, if they recognize shapes yet. I mean, just some of your typical stuff that are you kindergartner ready? Right. So they do a readiness exam. I mean, most people have been through this. It's not a big deal. Well, this was new language put in to then instead also assess a child's ability to enter school based on social emotional items. And I was like, and the lady who was running it, State Representative Camille Lilly, she's a Chicago Democrat, no kids. She has no kids whatsoever. And I was like, okay, honestly, from a practical standpoint, I'm telling you, any one of my 5 kids could be an emotional wreck because I didn't have Fruit Loops in the cupboard for breakfast that day.
Right.
I mean, they could, and then they have to go to their social emotional sort of evaluation by somebody they don't know and isn't comfortable with, and they're going to assess because the kid woke up late or didn't sleep well, or I don't care, had an allergy or whatever it might be.
Right.
And they're off kilter, and you're going to, on that one thing, judge them for their readiness on social emotional stuff when you don't know my child as well as I do.
Right.
Okay, then the other thing, a problem about this is once they give that child some sort of scoring on the social emotional level,
which is what the surveys do.
That's right. So once they do that, your child's categorized.
Correct.
It's almost as if you're giving them some sort of designation for any other thing that would follow them in their school record.
Right.
ADD, ADHD,
Right. And there's no
behavioral
HIPAA laws
stuff.
protecting
None of
this
this
information.
No.
There's no HIPAA because it's not in a psychologist's office.
But you label your kid. Maybe you label them gifted. Okay, whatever. You label your kid at age 5, 6. You're putting them on a pathway to have that label follow them their entire academic time.
And that's what these surveys are all about. They get this information on your student, your child. They send it away to Panorama or whoever else collected it. Who knows who sees it? And then they send the data back to the teacher and say, this kid needs to work on fill in the blank. They're not whatever enough according to the social emotional learning guidelines.
Oh, that's crap. That's just garbage.
That's exactly what it is. So it sends out, and then the teachers receive feedback on your students. So again, yes, your students are being labeled, and they're looking out for whatever undesirable behaviors that the SEL people want to see in your children. Who cares what you're trying to, raise your son or daughter to become? But yeah, so we've got this data
like a free thinking
mining.
individual.
Right, forget that.
Right. I remember my son, who's the Navy pilot now, and I don't care if people know it, but I mean, his first, second, and third grade teacher, like, he's ADD. You need to do something about it. I'm like, no, we're not. Sorry.
Yeah.
He graduated near the top of his class at West Point, and now he's a Navy pilot.
There you go.
Sorry, not doing it. I know my kid better than you.
Right.
I know my kid better than you.
And parents too.
Yeah.
Right.
And they do. And so I think a lot of this, I just don't agree with it. Certainly there's kids who have issues and need help. I get it. But that is not the vast majority of them.
Well, and so like we were saying, beside the obvious data mining on these surveys, the questions, the constant questioning of the surveys, you were saying what I found online is there was a study. This is an article from 2006, and the study, the thesis, the abstract is, several recent lines of survey research demonstrate that the simple act of asking a question can lead to changes in a respondent's subsequent behavior. Well, if you take that, abstract from this study, they're saying that the more you ask somebody the questions, like you said in your voter polling, the more you ask these kids about gender, the more you ask them about certain behaviors, sexual things that little children should know, or even middle schoolers and even high schoolers. You're peppering them with all these questions about things, and you're making them more predisposed. And I hate to use this word, but you're actually grooming them toward a certain behavior. And I know that grooming is like one of those red flag words, but it's honestly, it's a good fit right here because you are getting that kid used to hearing these terms. You're getting a kid used to hearing all these LGBTQ words that they might have never heard before. And you're getting them past that I'm uncomfortable with these words into, oh yeah, I've heard about that since kindergarten. You're grooming these kids so that they don't have an aversion or a reaction or any kind. It doesn't matter what you've been taught in your home, what your parents believe, what your family's cultural values are. It's all about what information is on the survey, heads back to the survey people and back to the teacher and says, oh, this kid, he doesn't believe like we want him to believe. So we've got to keep working on this kid on this value or that value. So this whole asking questions about behaviors is very dangerous. And I think that most parents wouldn't know that. I mean, I hadn't really put 2 and 2 together on that. When I found this, I thought, you know what? The light bulb kind of went off. And I thought that really makes a lot of sense. And I think that these folks that do the surveys know that. And they're starting so young on purpose. That they just are breaking these kids down.
Well, listen, the only way this is going to be solved is if we have a revolt by parents and good teachers against what is happening in the classroom.
Right.
So I appreciate you coming on and informing my listening audience a little bit more about this issue. It is not going away anytime soon. So parents, I encourage you to get to your school board meetings, pay attention to what's going on, get onto an advisory committee of your school if you possibly can. And teachers, good teachers, need to stand up against this and expose what's going on in the classroom. That's the only way out of this. And after that, it's full school choice. That's where we need to go as an entire country.
Right.
Parents get to choose where their child goes to school, and the money follows the child. That's the only solution, is to introduce competition for these public schools, and they will be put out of business, I assure you. And so will bad private schools. So that's the wave of the future. That's what we're going to be working on. So Kelly, thank you so much for coming on my program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks.